Hey everybody, before we get started with this episode, we have a quick request. We're fast approaching 200 episodes and planning out the future of the podcast. If you really love what we do and appreciate the great content we provide each week, then there's a few quick ways that you can support us with your time and consideration.
有几种方式可以来支持我们，那请大家到各大的 podcast 平台上面帮我们评分，让更多人能够得到有用的沟通知识。您也可以赞助我们，还有最后呢，我们最近有开箱 review 了 Thank You Trivolo U 蓝牙语言学习音响，那有兴趣的朋友可以点下专属连结。如果你想要了解更多，也可以到第194集的单元收听。
Your support and feedback has been immensely useful for us on this journey, and we hope that going forward you can continue to find value and enjoyment for what we do each week. Now, let's get into our show.
想要知道怎么样听起来更像母语人士吗？市面上有很多的课程教大家母语人士专用的一些片语，但是今天我们要来帮大家检视这一些片语的情景，还有真正适合的用法。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast. I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. We all know that the internet is filled with top 10 lists of what not to say to sound like a native speaker. It's all over Instagram and YouTube. But the truth is, it's not as straightforward as these lists like to make it. It often means that they're taking phrases and words out of context. So today, we want to look at a few common phrases that people will often push back and say, don't say this, that's not what a native speaker says, and talk about the context, because it may be perfectly okay.
那要感谢我们今天 Lucy 我们的 intern 帮我们收集了这一些不同的 phrases 这些片语。当然我们一直都要强调就是 context is the most important thing， 尤其是对于这么多人现在已经在职场了，你可能是主管级或者你希望能够当主管的话，那你更要了解什么样子的片语适合用在什么样子的状况。 It's definitely not so black and white, like don't use this, use that. That's definitely not the case.
Let's start with a phrase that often gets picked on. You must decide. You have to decide. You'll often see people go, well, that's not really what we say. It's more like, make up your mind. You need to make up your mind. This is true. Make up your mind is a great phrase. But there are several contexts where asking someone to make a decision and being very direct is okay.
I would say make up your mind 它是一个非常直接的讲法。如果你在跟朋友啦，大家在使用，你说我们到底等一下去做什么 Like what do we want to do later on or on Friday night? And then you cannot decide and you can say make up your mind. 那我觉得是很 OK 的。但是真的要用在职场上吗？ You have to be really careful about this.
This is usually in a context where you probably have a personal relationship with this person. I really wouldn't use this.
Yeah.
For example, probably the most common scenario you'll see this is if you want to leave for dinner and someone you know is just digging through their closet and they can't really decide what they want to wear.
I have a rebuttal, by the way.
And then you just be like, make up your mind. Let's go. This may be a case where you commonly see it. But if you're in a boardroom, you're in a conference call, if you ever use the phrase make up your mind, you will come across as incredibly rude.
Yeah.
So this would be a time it's like, we really need to decide, or it's really important for you to decide between A and B.
Yeah, exactly. 所以我觉得 you have to decide or it's really important for you to decide. There's nothing wrong with that. 我觉得这个 phrase perfectly fine. 或者如果你还想要更 indirect 比较委婉的方式，那你就可以讲 We'd love to know what you think by end of today.
Let's look at another phrase that a lot of people purport shows whether you're a native speaker or not. The phrase that things are still up in the air.
Right.
This is a phrase that sounds really beautiful and important. Like, oh, things are up in the air. Like, what's the relationship between you and John? Things are up in the air. To mean that, it's not certain or it hasn't been decided. But this is a very casual phrase. This is a phrase that maybe you will see in the office place, but I can almost guarantee you if your boss asks you, what's going on with this? And you answer, oh, things are up in the air. They will not be happy because they will want very specifically what is up in the air, what is happening. It's not a phrase you can use to just answer a question.
那如果在 boardroom 或者在开会的时候，老板真的问你说，你决定了没有？Again, Nick 刚刚讲了，如果你今天讲 things are still up in the air, no one would be happy about that. 因为你听起来就是好像也没有想要做决定的感觉。So actually here, you can be honest, right? First of all, be honest. It hasn't been decided yet. 那这一句呢，我觉得虽然它听起来不是那种很酷的一个片语，但是它是在这个情况上正确的用法。那当然你接下来可能就要提供一些解释。You have to explain why it hasn't been decided yet.
Right. So if you use the phrase, it hasn't been decided yet, we're waiting on like A, B, C.
Yeah.
That's completely okay. In fact, most often a manager or boss would rather you say, it hasn't been decided, we're waiting on A, B, C, than look at them and be like, oh, things are up in the air. Because things are up in the air also, that phrase specifies that you don't know when they're coming down, which means you don't have a plan. It will not end well.
Exactly.
So context matters.
So maybe you have to negotiate with your clients and you need to report back to your boss. 那你今天可能因为你们今天讨论的部分呢，并没有一个确切的一个答案，所以你可以跟你的老板讲说 Well, there's still room for discussion. And that's okay, because that just means you guys have not finished or haven't reached an agreement yet. Or you can just say that. We have not reached an agreement yet.
The next phrase that we get into is something that particularly lights my fire when I see people put this on a list. They often like to say native speakers will not use the phrase, I agree. They'll say something like, you can say that again.
It's really funny because 我不太记得上一次有谁跟我这样讲说 you can say that again. I'm talking about from native speaker. I really haven't heard this kind of phrase in a very long time.
This phrase gets used a lot in a very sarcastic tone. It also gets used a lot, but only in a very over-the-top situation. This is not something you would say on a daily basis. So it's not a great exchange for I agree. In a formal setting, using I agree works all the time.
Yeah.
With the right context, it's usually in agreement with what or agreement with what decision. So if someone is speaking, it's like, I agree about. I think one of the issues that a lot of people have with I agree is it cannot be a statement in and of itself unless someone asks you, like, do you agree with me? Be like, yeah, I agree. But if someone has, like, for example, a plan or they have something to say, they don't want just agreement. They want to understand specifically what do you agree with or what are you willing to do. So you'll hear I agree a lot in terms of like, I really agree with this part of your plan or I agree with this step. It's not just like the phrase, unless someone asks you a question and it's just a direct answer. But you may put it in context of people want to know, what do you agree with?
所以我觉得有很多的这些 phrase， 因为我们在做这种 list 的时候，可能放在网络上面看起来就很简单，但是当然我们在实际生活上，我们不可能只讲 I agree 就会结束，你一定要后面要接着 What do you agree about? Or what do you want to highlight? Or what do you want to do with that statement? 而且你也不可能讲说 You can say that again in the meeting room. That's not okay. 在真实生活中，我觉得请大家一定要去想说，我讲完这句话 之后会发生什么事情。You need to plan ahead and you actually need to think about what's going to happen in the future. Okay, so the next one is actually kind of interesting. 而且我觉得我们一定要好好来聊一下。So for non-native speaker, okay, on the list it says, people tend to say, I made a big mistake. But for native speaker, the phrase would be, I screwed up big time. But to be really honest, 如果我们用在这种 meeting, 我们的工作场合当中，如果你跟你老板说 I screwed up big time, oh man, that is not good.
Yeah, the phrase in general, screwed up. Yeah, you hear it a lot in TV shows, movies. This phrase is really common and you'll hear people use it very often. Like, oh man, Sherry really screwed up her project. I can't believe she did that. But this is something where it's really okay to say, oh, I made a mistake. These are completely normal and perfectly usable phrases. What you'll actually see is that we'll use hedging language or find ways to downplay a mistake. That is a more common thing to do, not to use something like, oh, I made a mistake to I screwed up. We will downplay that. Be like, there was a slight oversight. Or I just want to talk about a minor inconvenience. There was a small bump in the road. Usually to mean like, oh, I made a mistake. I have a problem.
But I think saying that there is a slight oversight or I want to report a minor inconvenience 这个部分这两句我就觉得比较适合用在我们在工作场合当中，因为在跟老板讲说我们犯了一个错误，你大部分的人没有办法非常直接的讲说 Oh, I screwed up big time. So personally, 我觉得啦，其实如果你今天真的是犯了一个错误的话 You can say I made a mistake. That's totally fine. 我觉得这个一点都没有什么不好的地方。Or again, 刚刚 Nick 讲，如果你想要稍微比较修饰一点，让它这件事情看起来没有那么的 horrible, then you just say there's a slight oversight or I want to report it minor inconvenience.
Yeah, or you'll hear people preface things. They'll just go and be like, there's no way to get around this. We've got a problem.
Yeah.
Or I have no way to sugarcoat this. I made a mistake.
Exactly. Like, I just have to be direct with you right now.
Let's get into our next phrase. Something you see all the time in movies. And it's something that we do say a lot.
I say it a lot. A lot.
And that would be the phrase, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
That mean that, I'm upset, I'm surprised, I'm really angry. But usually that picture that someone in mind is like someone like grabbing their hair and pulling it and just like losing their mind. So you'll see this like, oh, everyone was freaking out after this big event happened.
Right.
But what happens is with this phrase, it can get used for a very positive thing or a very negative thing. The range of how it gets used is quite huge. So it's hard to pin it down to say, okay, instead of saying, oh, I was really afraid, I was really terrified, you can use this phrase instead. Because that phrase in of itself has a huge range of usage.
I mean, I would actually suggest, because when you say, I am freaking out, again, 刚刚Nick讲，它可以是非常极度的好或极度的差的这个情况。如果在办公室或者是我们在做这个沟通的时候，你反而要更 specific. I think it's better to actually pinpoint exactly where your emotional state is. If you say I'm freaking out and you don't really have the correct tone of voice to complement it, like, 如果 let's say 我得到了 lottery 好了, you can say, oh my God, I'm freaking out, right? That it sounds like you're happy. But if you're like, oh my God, something huge happened, it's horrible, oh my God, I'm freaking out. So your voice and your tone of voice would sound very different. But if you cannot communicate that, then it's much better if you are very specific with your emotional state.
Even imagine if you were writing a text message. If you just sent someone a line message that said, I'm freaking out, probably the first thought in their mind is something has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
So you have to attach it to some kind of feeling or context where you're just like, oh my gosh, I just won $10,000 with the receipt lottery. I'm freaking out. Yep. Then someone would be like, okay, that's exciting. Or be like, our company stock plunged by 4% today. Our boss is freaking out. Like, okay, so again, you can see that with context, that range of what's being used. But the reality is there's something in psychology and coaching and counseling gets used a lot called the emotion wheel, where it actually, you can see like different major emotions and the nuance between them. Understanding like how to choose a specific word based on your feeling is more useful than just using a blanket phrase like this.
It is. I would definitely say 你可以讲 I'm so excited, I'm overwhelmed, I'm annoyed. 这一些都会比讲 I'm freaking out 还要好得多，因为对方才能够真正知道你现在的感受是什么。The next one we're going to talk about, it's not actually a phrase, 但是我觉得这个部分我很想要来提出来，因为我常常会感受到我们 native speaker 跟 non-native speaker 会有中间一个很奇妙的一个 gap， 也就是这个 word, excited.The word excited, the way native speaker used it, it's very different from how non-native speaker would perceived, right? 比如说我们常常会问人家 Are you excited about this? 这个是 native speaker 常常会用的一个句子 Like, are you excited about the new project? Are you excited about school? 但是我觉得在我们东方国家的人来讲 excited 这个东西它是真的是等于兴奋，但是兴奋是一个很极端的一个 emotional state。那我觉得可能是因为文化来讲我们是比较 reserved 一点内敛的一些人，所以你要说要我们 excited 我觉得很难，所以大部分人听到这一句都会说 No, I'm not excited about school. I'm like okay with it, but I'm not excited.
The easiest way to give a parallel to what we often mean by this is more along the terms of like, are you looking forward to?
Yeah.
Is there anything that gets you interested or gets you happy about going to do this thing? It doesn't have to be like, I was on a roller coaster, it was so crazy, it's so exciting type level. But we'll often just use the phrase in terms of like, are you looking forward to your first day at a new job?
Yeah.
Are you excited about your first day at a new job? You don't have to be like jumping up and down, freaking out about doing this. It's more along the lines of, is there something that you're interested or that you're looking forward to?
Right, 所以下次如果一个 native speaker 问你 Are you excited about? 那这个 excited 你就把它听成是 looking forward 期待就好了，它并不是真的在问你是不是很兴奋。So I think this is something I have to throw in there because I find out a lot of non-native speaker find that questions very confusing. They're like, no. The first answer they would go like, no, I'm not excited about that. Why would I be excited about my clients?
Well, we hope you enjoyed this quick look at phrases that are commonly misunderstood or people point out as being non-native speaker. As we said over and over again, context matters. Understanding how they are used is more important than finding a fun slang or phrase. If there are any phrases you think we missed or you would like us to talk more about, of course, let us know. Reach out by giving us a review or sending us a message. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.